The negotiation chamber aboard the neutral station, Stasis Concord, was a masterpiece of intentional blandness. Its walls were a soft, non-reflective gray. The air was scrubbed of all but the most basic, life-sustaining elements, and the light that filled the space had no discernible source, glowing with a flat, shadowless uniformity. It was a room designed to be a vacuum, a place where the substance of diplomacy could exist untainted by aesthetics. For the Elthar, it was an insult. Their reality was woven from the rich tapestry of shared consciousness, from the subtle hues of emotion and the resonant frequencies of thought. To them, this sterile chamber was akin to holding a conversation in a sensory deprivation tank. Xylos, lead emissary of the Elthar Compact, let his three primary eyes drift over the human delegation. Two of them seated on the opposite side of the polished obsidian table. Ambassador Aris Thorn, a male of middle years, his face a landscape of faint lines that suggested a life of thought rather than hardship. His hair was streaked with gray at the temples, a sign of senescence the Elthar archives noted humans found distinguished. Beside him sat a younger woman, Specialist Kara Vance, her posture rigid, her focus absolute. They were, to Xylos's extended senses, islands of cacophonous solitude. Their minds were loud, chaotic storms of isolated cognition, walled off from one another. It was a primitive, pitiful state of being. Ambassador Thorn, Xylos projected, his voice a smooth, multitonal chord that resonated directly in the minds of the humans, while a translator rendered a passable version into the air of the room. We have reviewed your preliminary proposal regarding the cerulean expanse. It is insufficient. Thorn offered a calm, unreadable smile. Emissary Xylos, we felt it was a generous starting point. The trade routes through that sector are vital to our fledgling colonies. Vitality is a matter of perspective, Xylos returned, allowing a sliver of his condescension to color the thought. Your colonies are nascent, fragile. Our claim to the expanse is measured in millennia. You ask us to cede a piece of our history for a promise of your future. This was the formal dance, the exchange of meaningless words that served as a canvas. The real work was about to begin. The Elthar did not negotiate with words. They negotiated with reality itself. Their telepathic abilities were not a crude tool for reading surface thoughts. They could reach deeper into the bedrock of memory and experience and gently, artfully reshape it. Why argue that a proposal was flawed when you could simply make the author remember the flaw, remember the moment of doubt during its conception, and let them argue against themselves? Xylos focused, his mind extending like an impossibly fine filament across the table. He bypassed the noisy shield of Thorn's active consciousness and sought the deeper currents of his past. The human mind was a messy archive, poorly organized and rife with emotional contamination. It was child's play. He found a suitable memory, Thorn as a young cadet at a diplomatic academy, a crucial final examination. The pressure, the fear of failure. Gently, Xylos began to paint. He didn't erase the memory of Thorn passing the exam. That would be a clumsy, detectable alteration. Instead, he painted in the margins. He amplified the feeling of nauseating anxiety. He added a phantom memory of a proctor frowning in disapproval. He inserted a fleeting, gut-wrenching certainty that Thorn had answered a key question incorrectly. He wove this thread of failure into the existing tapestry, linking it subliminally to the current negotiation. You are out of your depth. You are about to fail again. This proposal is that same incorrect answer. He withdrew, the entire process taking less than a second. He watched Thorn for a sign, a flicker of the eye, a tightening of the jaw, a subtle shift in posture. Nothing. The ambassador's calm smile remained. He took a slow sip of water from a glass, his movements deliberate. Perhaps you could elaborate on which specific points you find insufficient, emissary. Generational claims are strong, but the commerce of the present has its own pressing realities. Xylos felt a flicker of annoyance. The seed was planted. Perhaps the human's crude consciousness was simply slow to process it. He would add another layer. He extended his focus again, this time to the younger human, Vance. Her mind was more disciplined, its surface thoughts like a fortress wall. But beneath it, the same chaotic ocean. He found a memory of her receiving this assignment, a moment of pride and honor. Xylos reached in and delicately stitched in a thread of doubt. He implanted the ghost of a superior's comment, overheard but not truly heard. "She's not ready, but Thorn insisted." He added the bitter flavor of being second choice, the gnawing feeling of being an imposter. He pulled back, observing her. Caravance's spine seemed to straighten even further, her gaze on the obsidian table becoming, if possible, more intense. There was no sign of the confusion or insecurity he had intended to sow. Beside him, Myra, his junior attaché, sent a private, shimmering thought. Their minds are unusually resilient to suggestion, emissary. The resonance is shallow. Patience, Myra, Xylos sent back a touch more sharply than he intended. These are solitary minds. They are not accustomed to their own depths. The seeds will sprout when their focus wavers. They will feel the truth of our position not because we tell them, but because their own reinforced memories tell them. The verbal negotiations continued for another hour. The humans were polite, articulate, and utterly immovable. They presented data streams, economic models, and demographic projections. Xylos and his two companions, the silent elder jurist and the observant Myra, countered with historical precedents, philosophical arguments about stewardship, and subtle, continuous waves of psychic manipulation. They tried to make Thorn remember a promise he never made to a rival political faction, one that would be broken by this deal. They attempted to give Vance a false memory of a technical report she'd forgotten to read, a report that detailed the catastrophic failure of a similar trade agreement a century ago. They layered suggestion upon suggestion, doubt upon doubt, seeking to build a substructure of failure beneath the human's confidence. And through it all, Thorn and Vance remained placid, their arguments consistent, their composure absolute. It was unnerving. It was like throwing stones into a pool of mercury. The surface dented for a moment, then flowed back, perfectly smooth, leaving no trace of the impact. When the session concluded for the day, the humans stood, offered pleasant, formal nods, and departed. As the chamber door hissed shut behind them, Myra turned her four opalescent eyes toward Xylos. "Emissary, I felt something else, not just resistance, an echo. When you implanted the memory of the forgotten report in Specialist Vance, I felt a resonance back. It was structured." "Human mental static," Xylos dismissed, though he too had felt it. A strange harmonic, a fleeting and complex pattern that seemed to bloom in the wake of his own psychic intrusions. "Their minds are disordered. When we touch them, they reverberate unpredictably. It is the clash of a coherent thought with a sea of chaos." The elder jurist, who had remained silent and motionless, his ancient mind a placid lake, finally stirred. A single, profound thought, like the tolling of a great bell, entered their shared space. The sea has a tide. Xylos resisted the urge to show his unease. The jurist's insights were rarely wrong. He had been present for first contact with 7 different species. His mind was a living library of galactic diplomacy. "We will redouble our efforts tomorrow," Xylos declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Their solitude is their weakness. We will simply fill their inner silence with our own truth until there is no room for their falsehoods." He retired to his personal meditation chamber, a room that shimmered with soft, ambient light attuned to his neural frequency. He closed his eyes, intending to review the session, to analyze the human's arguments and find new vectors for his psychic attacks. But as he settled his consciousness, a strange image surfaced. It was a memory, crisp, vivid, and deeply resonant. He was standing on a wooden porch, the air thick with the scent of rain on dry earth and something sweet and floral. A small, furry creature with dark, intelligent eyes, a dog. His mind, supplied instantly, rested its head on his knee. He felt the warmth of its fur, the gentle pressure of its weight. A feeling of profound, uncomplicated affection washed over him. A woman's voice, warm and laced with laughter, called a name. "Eris," from inside a house. Xylos recoiled, his eyes snapping open. The memory vanished, but the emotional residue clung to him like smoke. It was not his. It was human. It was intimate, specific, and mundane. He recognized the name. Eris Thorn. He had not probed for anything so personal, so pointless. His targets had been strategic, related to the negotiation. Where had this come from? Had he accidentally scooped it up from the surface of Thorn's mind? It felt too complete, too coherent for that. Human minds, in his experience, didn't hold memories with such narrative and sensory perfection. Their memories were messy, jumbled things. He tried to dismiss it. A psychic anomaly. A phantom echo from the chaotic human brain. But as he tried to sink back into his meditation, another image surfaced. This time, it was from the perspective of Kara Vance. She was a child flying a kite on a windswept beach. The pull of the string in her hand, the sting of sand on her cheeks, the roaring sound of the ocean, the brilliant blue of the sky. The feeling was one of pure, unadulterated joy. It felt as real as any memory he had ever possessed. Xylos stood up, pacing the shimmering floor. This was not static, this was not chaos. This was a signal, a broadcast, but it was impossible. Humans were not telepathic. The entire foundation of their diplomatic strategy rested on that fact. They were solitary, they were isolated. They were vulnerable, weren't they? The next day, Xylos entered the negotiation chamber with a new sense of caution. The blandness of the room now seemed less like an insult and more like a warning. The humans were already there, Thorne sipping his water, Vance reviewing a datapad. They looked up and smiled. The same placid, unreadable smiles. "Good morning, emissary," Thorne said, his voice pleasant. "We have reconsidered one of our ancillary clauses regarding mineral tariffs. We believe we can offer a more flexible arrangement." Xylos barely registered the words. He was focused on the minds before him. He reached out, not with a targeted probe, but with a wide, gentle listening field trying to sense the undercurrents. He found the memories he had implanted yesterday. They were there, but they were encapsulated. Thorne's mind had not rejected the memory of his academic failure. It had built a new narrative around it. Xylos could feel it. A secondary memory of Thorne meeting with his professor after the exam. The professor explaining that while his answer was technically unconventional, it showed a brilliant, creative approach to the problem. The shame Xylos had implanted was now a source of pride, a testament to the ambassador's unique mind. In Vance's mind, the implanted doubt of being second choice was now framed by a memory of Thorne telling her, "I need someone they'll underestimate. I need your discipline and your focus, Kara. You're not the obvious choice, you're the correct one." They hadn't defended against his attacks. They had absorbed them. They had metabolized his poison and turned it into sustenance. It was then that Thorne looked directly at him, and for a fleeting instant, Xylos felt a deliberate, focused thought from the ambassador. It wasn't a Elthar-style projection, all chords and harmonies. It was sharp, precise, and visual. It was an image of a chess master sacrificing a pawn to set up a devastating checkmate. Xylos felt a cold dread crystallize in his core consciousness. They knew, they had known from the beginning. The tariff adjustment is acceptable in principle, Xylos managed to project, his mind reeling. Let us review the specifics. As the human Vance began to speak, outlining the new terms, Thorne leaned back slightly in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment, a picture of relaxation. And then the onslaught began. It was not an attack. It was a gift. A memory, offered freely, bloomed in the minds of the three Elthar. It was a memory of Aris Thorne standing on the summit of a mountain on Earth. The wind whipped at his clothes, the air was thin and bitingly cold. Below, a sea of clouds stretched to the horizon, painted pink and gold by a rising sun. The feeling was not one of triumph, but of profound, humbling awe. Of being a small, fleeting thing in the face of an immense, uncaring, and beautiful universe. The sensory detail was staggering, the grit of rock under his boots, the scent of cold stone and distant pine, the way the silence was so deep it felt like a sound in itself. The memory was beautiful. It was also a complete fabrication. Aris Thorne had a fear of heights and had never been mountaineering in his life. It was a construct, designed by a team of memeticists and cognitive scientists at the Diplomatic Corps Psychological Warfare Division. It was Project Chimera, Myra gasped, a soft psychic hiss of astonishment. Such clarity, such solitude. Is this what it feels like to be human? To stand alone before the universe, even the elder jurist seemed stirred, a faint shimmer of curiosity emanating from his ancient mind. Xylos, however, was terrified. The memory felt real. More than that, it felt aspirational. Part of him now wished he had experienced that. He pushed the feeling down. A fascinating insight into the human aesthetic, ambassador, Xylos projected, trying to keep his mental voice from trembling. but it has little bearing on galactic commerce. Thorne opened his eyes. The calm smile was back. Everything has a bearing on everything, emissary. It is all a matter of context. And the context was rapidly becoming a nightmare. Over the next hour, the humans offered more gifts. They didn't target the Elthar's personal memories. They didn't try to make them doubt their past. Instead, they offered up slices of a fabricated human experience, each one designed with surgical precision to resonate with the Elthar psyche. They shared a memory of a scientist watching a nebula through a telescope for the first time, the intellectual ecstasy of discovery so pure it was almost a spiritual experience. They offered the memory of a composer finishing a symphony, the chaotic threads of music in her mind finally weaving together into a perfect, harmonious whole, a sensation deeply familiar and moving to the Elthar. Each memory was a work of art, more vivid, more emotionally resonant, and more narratively coherent than a real memory had any right to be. The Elthar were connoisseurs of consciousness, and this was the most exquisite vintage they had ever tasted. And it was poison. That night in his quarters, Xylos found he could not meditate. His own memories felt faded, gray. The memory of his first melding with the compact consciousness, the most sacred moment in a Elthar's life, felt hazy and distant compared to the fabricated, crystal-clear memory of the human composer hearing her finished symphony. He found himself humming a tune. A simple, haunting melody. He did not know it. He had never heard it before. Then he realized with a jolt of horror that it was the main theme from the composer's symphony. A symphony that had never been written by a woman who had never existed. He stormed into Myra's chambers without ceremony. She was standing by her own light wall, her slender form rigid with tension. The music, he projected, his thoughts sharp with panic. You hear it too. Myra turned her 4 eyes on him. They were wide with fear. I remember her name, Anya Sharma. I remember her struggling with the third movement. I remember the coffee she drank, the way she tapped her fingers. Xylos, how can I remember a life that was never lived? It is a trick, he insisted, his own conviction sounding hollow. A sophisticated projection. They are trying to distract us, to clutter our minds with this emotional debris. It feels more real than my own childhood, Myra whispered, her thought trembling. I remember the scent of the Cathar blossoms on my spawning day, but I also remember the smell of salt water and fried fish on a human pier, and the memory of the pier is sharper. The true genius of the human strategy was becoming terrifyingly clear. They weren't trying to break the Elthar. They were seducing them. They were showing them a form of reality, of memory, that was so much more compelling than their own, that their own minds were beginning to prefer the forgery. The next day, the humans escalated. They moved beyond sharing fabricated personal experiences. They began to implant memories about the Elthar themselves. As they debated a clause on xenobiology protocols, Thorne gave a small, thoughtful frown. You know, he said aloud, his voice musing, this reminds me of the classic Elthar philosophical paradox of the silent song. The idea that the most profound truth is the one that cannot be shared, only experienced individually. A concept your great thinker, Xyler, struggled with his entire life. Xylos froze. The elder jurist's placid mental field convulsed for a microsecond. Myra made a soft, distressed noise, Xyler. The silent song. There was no Elthar philosopher named Xyler. There was no paradox of the silent song. But in that instant, a full-blown history bloomed in Xylos's mind. It was complete, detailed, and utterly convincing. He could remember studying Xyler's work as a young acolyte. He could picture the ancient texts, recall the intricate debates about their meaning. He remembered a heated argument he'd had with another student about Xyler's controversial final thesis. The memory was perfect. It had texture, history, emotional weight. And it was a lie. He knew it was a lie. He must know it was a lie. But the memory was so strong, so deeply embedded, that his own, true knowledge of Elthar philosophy felt like a flimsy contradiction. He looked at the elder jurist, the living library of their culture, and saw a flicker of profound confusion in his ancient mind. The jurist was searching his own vast memories for any trace of this Xyler, and finding both nothing and everything. The human-implanted memory was so powerful it was casting a shadow, creating a phantom record where none existed. This was the turning point. This was when seduction became violation. The humans were not just forging their own truths. They were forging the Elthar's. Myra sent a frantic, private thought to Xylos. They are writing in the pages of our minds. They are adding chapters that were never there. Xylos felt a wave of psychic nausea. He looked at Eris Thorn. The human's face was serene, but his eyes held a profound, chilling sadness. This was not an act of aggression for him. It was an act of necessity. And in that moment, Xylos understood the terrifying nature of the species he was facing. The Elthar derived their strength from a shared, objective reality. They could manipulate it, but they were bound to it. Humans, the solitary minds, the chaotic islands, had no such anchor. Their reality was a consensus of fictions they told themselves. Money, laws, nations, gods, all stories they agreed to believe. They had spent millennia mastering the art of making lies real. And now they had weaponized it. The final session was a quiet apocalypse. The humans said very little. They sat in their placid silence, and the mimetic assault was relentless. They didn't even bother to tie it to the conversation anymore. They simply flooded the Elthar's consciousness with a fire hose of immaculate, layered deceptions. Xylos was given a complete, detailed memory of a Elthar civil war, a devastating conflict that had torn their home world apart for centuries before the compact was formed. He felt the grief, the rage, the bitter betrayals. He remembered battles that never happened, mourned heroes who never lived. The war explained schisms and quirks in modern Elthar society so perfectly that it felt more true than the actual, peaceful history of their unification. Myra received a memory of a lost Elthar art form, light weaving, the ability to sculpt pure thought into tangible, glowing forms. She felt the muscle memory of the art in her own psychic limbs. She yearned to practice a skill that had never existed, grieving for a beauty her people had never lost. The elder jurist, the rock, the anchor of their reality, simply sat, his eyes closed. But Xylos could feel the tremors in his mind. The humans had given him something truly diabolical. They had given him a memory of him making a mistake. A single, catastrophic misjudgment during a first-contact scenario centuries ago, a mistake that had led to the extinction of a gentle, spacefaring species. The jurist's entire identity was built on his flawless wisdom and judgment. The humans had inserted a memory of a single, unforgivable failure, and it was cracking the very foundation of his being. He was trapped in a loop, endlessly reviewing the details of his phantom crime, trying to find a way he could have acted differently. Xylos felt his own mind begin to fracture. He would look at Myra, and for a terrifying second, he would see her not as his attaché, but as his sworn enemy from the fabricated civil war. He would try to recall a basic tenet of the negotiation, and his mind would be flooded with the intricate theories of the philosopher Xyler. He was drowning in a sea of perfect lies. His own true memories felt thin and unreal, like faded photographs next to the vibrant, high-definition cinema the humans were projecting into his soul. He couldn't distinguish which thoughts were his. He couldn't trust his own feelings, because he couldn't tell if they were authentic or implanted emotional responses to fabricated events. His reality was no longer his own. It was a shared hallucination, curated by his enemies. He looked at Thorn. The human's expression was one of deep, weary pity. He wasn't enjoying this. He was ending it. Xylos tried to mount a counterattack, to find Thorn's mind and break it. He reached out and fell into a trap. He found himself inside Thorn's memory. But it was a memory of Thorn sitting in a briefing room years ago. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, Dr. Evelyn Reed, her nameplate Reed, was on a holographic display explaining the theoretical framework of Project Chimera. The Elthar perceived truth as a monolithic, objective constant. Reed's voice echoed in the phantom memory. They can edit it, but they believe in the original text. We don't have an original text. We are a species of storytellers. Our advantage is that we know it's all just stories, so we won't try to win the argument. We will rewrite the entire library in a language they find more beautiful than their own. Then, the memory shifted. Xylos was now seeing a memory of Dr. Reed herself, running a simulation. In the simulation, a Elthar emissary, a figure that looked disturbingly like Xylos, was breaking down psychologically. Reed was watching, her face clinical, taking notes. Xylos was experiencing a memory of his own predicted breakdown, from the perspective of the architect of that breakdown. The recursive, nightmarish horror of it was the final blow. A scream tore through the shared consciousness of the Elthar. It was a sound of pure psychic agony, of a mind that has looked into the abyss and seen its own reflection. It was Xylos's scream, but Myra and the jurist felt it as their own. Myra was the first to find the strength to act. She looked at the humans, her four eyes swimming with a terror so profound it transcended fear and bordered on a kind of religious awe. The words she projected were not for negotiation. They were a plea, a surrender, a diagnosis of a condition for which she had no cure. "They don't defend the truth," she broadcast, her thought form ragged and broken. "They forge new ones, and we can't tell which is ours anymore." The elder jurist's ancient eyes slowly opened. They were focused on Xylos, but the message was for the entire delegation. A single, powerful, desperate command: withdraw. Survive. Xylos, trembling, his mind a shattered ruin of competing realities, finally found his voice. He focused on Thorn, the anchor of his torment. We require an indefinite recess," he projected, the thought barely coherent. "Though the negotiations are concluded for now." Eris Thorn simply nodded, the profound sadness never leaving his eyes. "We understand, emissary. Take all the time you need." And Vance stood, turned, and walked out of the sterile, gray room, leaving the three Elthar adrift in the silent, screaming wreckage of their new reality. Later, in his own quarters, Eris Thorn stood before the blank gray wall, which now displayed a secure comms link to a small, unassuming office 4 light-years away. Dr. Evelyn Reed's face materialized, as sharp and clinical as she had been in the memory construct. "Report, Ambassador," she said, her voice devoid of triumph. "It's done," Thorn said, his voice heavy. He felt impossibly tired. "They broke. I don't know if they can ever be put back together again." "They will," Reed replied calmly. "The mimetic constructs are designed to sublimate over time, to fade into a kind of mythological background radiation. In a few years, they will simply believe their culture has a rich, newly discovered history of tragic wars and brilliant, lost artists. They won't remember us giving it to them. It will be theirs." "You call it sublimate," Thorn said, turning to look out the viewport at the endless river of stars. "I call it the deepest violation I can imagine. We didn't just defeat them, Evelyn. We rewrote their souls. The alternative was letting them rewrite ours," Reed countered, her voice softening for the first time. "They see telepathy as a tool of consensus and truth. We, as a species without it, learn to build our consensus differently. We build it with fictions, with shared belief in the intangible. Law, art, hope, fear, we live inside stories. It's the most fundamental, most dangerous, and most powerful thing about us. We didn't do something alien to them, Eris. We did the most human thing imaginable." Thorn watched the distant nebulae, cosmic clouds where new stars were being born. He wondered what the Elthar would tell their people. He wondered what new truths they were currently forging in the desperate quiet of their chambers to explain what had been done to them. And he wondered, with a deep and unsettling chill, what kind of stories humanity would have to tell itself about this day, to be able to live with the victory they had just won.